Bro, have you heard about the overwhelming evidence that your brain is a hologram?
What are you saying?
Brother, I ain't lying to you. Your brain's a hologram, and so is the universe. What kind of evidence are we talking about? Enter Carl Pribram, distinguished professor at Stanford University and a board-certified neurosurgeon. The dude is known as the Magellan of the mind. He proposed a theory called the holonomic theory of the brain. What is the gist? Come over here, I'll show you. Look at this water. If I throw a rock into it like this, you can see that it makes a wave pattern in the water. Now, if I throw two rocks, watch what happens. You can see how they make two different patterns and the waves intersect, right? Well, that's called an interference pattern. Okay, look, I know that probably wasn't the best explanation because it's so dark out and you probably weren't able to see it very well, but I feel like you get the gist. This interference pattern is what the whole theory is based on. Him and David Bohm, who's been described, by the way, as one of the most significant theoretical physicists of the 20th century, proposed that if we did not have lenses, or what we call eyes, the entire world would look like interference patterns. Everything would actually look holographic to us. So instead of seeing, say, this drink, it would look kind of like an undeveloped video game. And there's a lot of evidence to show that all of our senses transform these holograms into what we see, but hold on. First, let me explain how a hologram works to you because it's important. You can make a hologram when a single laser light is split into two separate beams. The first beam is bounced off the object to be photographed, then the second beam is allowed to collide with the reflected light of the first. When this happens, they create an interference pattern which is recorded on a piece of film. So this interference pattern that's been recorded on a piece of holographic film looks like nothing, right? But actually, if you just shine another laser beam onto the film, the thing that was originally being photographed shows up as holographic, or as a holographic image. But remember, that's not in 2 dimensions. We're talking about a full-fledged 3-dimensional hologram. And another interesting feature of the hologram, let's say you decided to cut the film in half that has the apple recorded on it, the holographic film. You'd think that you'd get half an apple, right? But no, not with holographic film. You can get the entire original apple, even though you're missing half of the piece of film. Well, that's because the whole is recorded in every part. You ever heard the saying, the entire universe exists within a grain of sand? Well, with the holographic model, the entire thing is recorded in every part. So if our brain is a hologram, this could explain much more than one might think about the nature of reality. So way back in the day, most scientists thought that there was a one-to-one correspondence between the image the eye sees and the way that the image is represented in the brain, which means when we look at a square, it was believed that the electrical activity in our visual cortex also possessed a form of a square. So let's bring back Carl Pribram. When he was at Yale, he devised a series of experiments to figure out what the truth was and spent the next 7 years carefully measuring the electrical activity in the brain of monkeys while they performed various visual tasks. He discovered that not only did no such one-to-one correspondence exist, but there wasn't even a discernible pattern to the sequence in which the electrodes fired. The only question that remained to him was what wave-like phenomenon the brain might be using to create such internal holograms. If the brain is holographic, as soon as he considered the question, he thought of the possible answer. It was known that the electrical communications that take place between the brain's nerve cells, or neurons, don't occur alone. Neurons actually possess branches like little trees. And when an electrical message reaches the end of one of these branches, it radiates outward, as does the ripple in the pond that we just talked about, or the river. When Pribram remembered this, he realized that they were probably creating an almost endless and kaleidoscopic array of interference patterns, and these in turn might be what gives the brain its holographic properties. And he said something along the lines of the hologram was there all the time in the wavefront nature of brain cell connectivity. We simply hadn't had the wit to realize it. Fucking savage. Okay, you got me, that's pretty wild. What else does this brain model explain? So this holographic model of the brain also explains how memory works. Patients who had portions of their brains removed for medical reasons never suffered the loss of a specific memory, which is weird considering the model of the day. This is kind of like individuals who had received head injuries in car collisions and other accidents never forgot half their family, or half of a novel they read. The holographic explanation for why this is happening is because the whole is encoded in every part, remember that. So when a part of the brain is removed, it does not affect memory.
Oh shit, that's big.
Yeah, I know, and get this. The holographic model can explain how our brains can store so many memories in so little space. There was a Hungarian physicist and mathematician, John von Neumann. He once calculated that over the course of the average human lifetime, the brain stores something on the order of 2.8 times 10 to the 20th bits of information. Brain researchers have been long trying to figure out how this is possible, but holograms have a ridiculous capacity for information storage. By changing the angle at which two lasers strike a piece of photographic film, it's possible to record many different images on the same surface. Any image thus recorded can be retrieved simply by illuminating the film with a laser beam possessing the same angle as the original two beams. By using this method, researchers have found out that 1 square inch of film can store the same amount of information contained in 50 Bibles. So the brain being a hologram also gives us a way to understand our ability to both remember and forget. When you've got a piece of film held in a laser beam and you tilt it back and forth, the various images it contains appear and disappear. It's been suggested that our ability to remember is like shining a laser beam on a piece of film and calling up a particular image with the angle of the laser beam. This may be equivalent to shining various beams on a piece of multiple image film, but you can't find the right angle to call up the image or memory that you're looking for. So the memory is there, but the angle is off. In 1972, Harvard vision researchers proposed that the holographic brain theory may explain why some people possess photographic memories. Typically, individuals with photographic memories will spend a few moments scanning the scene they wish to memorize. Jax, come. Jax, come. Can you come here? You doing okay, buddy? I know it's dark out. When they want to see the scene again, they project a mental image of it, either with their eyes closed or as they gaze at a blank wall or screen. The researchers noted that the image stored in a fragment of a holographic film gets hazier as the fragments get smaller. And the researchers suggest that perhaps such individuals have much more vivid memories because they somehow have access to very large regions of their memory holograms, which means that for the rest of us, the reason why our memories are much less vivid is because our access is limited to smaller regions of our memory holograms. It might feel obvious to you to be able to distinguish the difference between something that's happening internally and externally, but it's not so clear how our brains enable us to distinguish between the two. For example, Pribram pointed out that when we look at a person, the image of the person is really on the surface of our retinas. We don't feel like it's on our retinas. We perceive them as being out in the world somewhere. Kind of like when we stub our toe, we experience pain in our toe, but the pain isn't actually in our toe. It's a neurophysiological process taking place somewhere in our brain. How then is our brain able to take forth a bunch of neurophysiological processes that manifest as our experience, all of which are internal, and fool us into thinking that some are internal and some are located beyond the confines of our gray matter? And I'm just gonna keep popping off with more evidence. Why not? Let's bring in Nobel Prize winning physiologist George von Beckersey. In a series of experiments conducted in the late 1960s, he placed vibrators on the knees of blindfolded test subjects. Then he varied the rate at which the instruments vibrated. By doing so, he discovered that he could make his test subjects experience the sensation that a point source of vibration was jumping from one knee to the other. He found that he could even make his subjects feel the point source of vibration in the space between their knees, which means that humans have the ability to seemingly experience sensation in spatial locations where they have absolutely no sense receptors. And Pribram believed that Beckersey's work is compatible with the holographic view on how interfering wave fronts, or in Beckersey's case, interfering sources of physical vibration, enable the brain to localize some of its experiences beyond the physical boundaries of the body. And he feels that the holographic model might also be able to explain the phantom limb phenomenon, or the sensation experienced by some amputees that a missing arm or leg is still present. But maybe what they're really experiencing is the holographic memory of the limb that is still recorded in the interference patterns of their brains. Enter in Indiana University biologist Paul Peach, something like that. Peach came in and he wanted to prove Pribram wrong. He wanted to prove this holographic theory wrong. And he was especially skeptical of the claim that memories don't possess a specific location in the brain. So to prove the holographic brain model wrong, he devised a series of experiments. And as the test subjects, he chose salamanders. This might be gross to you, but it's just science and I don't give a fuck. In previous studies, he discovered that he could remove the brain of a salamander without offing it, and although it remained in a stupor as long as its brain was missing, its behavior completely returned to normal as soon as the brain was restored. If a salamander's feeding behavior is not confined to any specific location in the brain, then it shouldn't matter how its brain is positioned in its head. If it did matter, the holographic theory would be disproven. He then flip-flopped the left and right hemispheres of the salamander's brain, but to his frustration, as soon as it recovered, the salamander quickly resumed normal feeding. He then took another salamander and turned its brain upside down. When it recovered, it too fed normally. Then he was pissed and he decided to resort to drastic measures. In a series of over 700 operations, he sliced, flipped, shuffled, subtracted, and even minced the brains of his subjects. But always when he replaced what was left of their brains, their behavior returned to normal. These findings and others turned Peach into a believer and attracted enough attention to make his research be popular enough for 60 Minutes. Because remember, this is back in the day. So let's take a different turn. So the guy who won a Nobel Prize for enabling the development of the first hologram was Dennis Gaber. Gaber based his work on something called Fourier transforms. These transforms enabled Gaber to convert a picture of an object into the blur of interference patterns on the film that we were talking about earlier that I showed you in the river too. They also show the opposite, which is taking the interference patterns and making them into a hologram. Throughout the late 1960s and 70s, researchers contacted Pribram and told him that they uncovered evidence that the visual system worked as a kind of frequency analyzer. Since frequency is a measure of the number of oscillations a wave undergoes per second, this strongly suggested that the brain might be functioning as a hologram does. But it wasn't until 1979 that Berkeley neurophysiologists made a discovery that settled the matter. Research in the 1960s had shown that each brain cell in the visual cortex is geared to respond to a different pattern. Some brain cells fire when the eyes see a horizontal line, others fire when the eyes see a vertical line, and so on. As a result, many researchers concluded that the brain takes input from these highly specialized cells called feature detectors and somehow fits them together to provide us with our visual perceptions of the world. But despite the popularity of this view, the researchers felt like it was only a partial truth. So to test their assumptions, they used Fourier's equations to convert the patterns into waveform. Then they wanted to see how the brain cells in the visual cortex responded to these new waveform images. What they found was that the brain cells responded not only to the original patterns, but to the Fourier translations of the patterns. Only one conclusion could be drawn. The brain was using Fourier mathematics, the same mathematics calligraphy or holography employed, to convert the visual images into the Fourier languages of waveforms. So let me simplify this really quick because it's really big. Very simply, the brain uses the same mathematical patterns that holograms use. And this discovery was confirmed by a shit ton of other laboratories around the world. And although it didn't provide absolute proof the brain was a hologram, it supplied enough evidence to convince Pribram that his theory was correct. And this idea that the visual cortex was responding not to patterns, but to the frequencies of various waveforms got him really excited. Then he began to think about the role frequency played in other senses. It didn't take him very long to realize that the importance of this had been overlooked by scientists for a long time. Over a century before the Fourier transform discovery, the German physiologist Hermann von Helmont had shown that the ear was a frequency analyzer. More recent research revealed that our sense of smell seems to be based on what is called osmic frequencies. Bexy's work clearly demonstrated that our skin is sensitive to frequencies of vibration, and he even produced some evidence that taste may involve frequency analysis. Pribram realized that if the holographic brain model is taken to its logical conclusions, it opens the door for the possibility that objective reality, as we see it, the world of drinks, of fire, might not even exist, or at least it might not exist in the way that we believe it exists. Is it possible that what the mystics have been saying for centuries is true? Reality is Maya, or an illusion, and what's out there is really just a vast, resonating symphony of waveforms, or a frequency domain, that's transformed into the world as we know it only after it enters our senses. Pribram realized that the solution he was seeking might lie outside his own field, so he went to his physicist's son for advice, who recommended he look into the work of a physicist named David Bohm, who worked closely with Albert Einstein. He not only found the answer to his question, but he also discovered that according to Bohm, the entire universe is a hologram. All right, I hope you enjoyed this here deep dive into the holographic universe model. And I just want you to know, first off, that this research was not done by me. I don't take any credit. What I did was I read this book called The Holographic Universe, and it absolutely blew my mind, and I just wanted to share the information in it, so that's the basis. Michael Talbot is the one who has done all of this research, so what I would recommend that you do if you're interested in this topic is check out his book, Holographic Universe. It is one of the most brilliant books I've ever read. Michael Talbot was a genius. And also I wanted to say shout out to all of my people on Patreon, all of my family. You are really supporting this endeavor at a high level, and I very greatly appreciate it, much more than you'll ever know. And so, if you want to support this work, consider joining the Patreon. It's an advanced Patreon. We've got a new workshop. Week 1, week 2, Q&A, book club. This was part of the book club. This is actually the book we did last month. So if you want to read this and then watch the replay of what we talked about, we went over a lot of great things, and then continue to be a part of the book club. But other than that, if you enjoyed this video, like the damn video. If you like the video, why not? Shit! Other than that, we'll see you in the next one, okay? We've got plenty more great videos, so go ahead and check them out too. Okay, peace.